Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today has written a very unusual and exciting book, and her name is Jen Frey. Hello, Jen.
Hello, Anna. Thanks for having me.
And of course, the book is all important. Here it is, communicating with plants. This is an unusual concept for very many people. So, Jen, tell us, what do you mean by communicating with plants?
That's a great question. So I mean receiving direct information from them. So, people, when they hear communicating, we tend to immediately go to talking like you and I are right now. That's what we normally think of as um, speech and hearing. But we know that even in our own human communications, that's actually a small part of it. Like, fortunately, thanks to wonderful technology, I can see you. So I'm, getting information. You're nodding your head. That gives me information, right? You didn't utter a word. And we can tell information when people walk into a room, even if they're a total stranger, we can get a glimpse of how they're feeling or, um, there's signs. There's so many ways that we receive information in our from human to human that is not about speech. And that's the same thing about plants. So communicating means receiving information, guidance, wisdom from our plant allies.
And we are used to nonverbal communication, those of us who are living with animals too. Uh,
Absolutely.
it's I can remember um, a few years back, I was teaching an astrology class, and one of my students was looking at something, and I just went and picked it up and gave it to her. I I thought about it after, and as I did it, I laughed because I realized this is years of living with cats, being used to, and living with a dog, the same thing.
Right,
Um,
right.
I I know what he needs. I know, and young, mothers of young babies
Absolutely.
will also know what the baby is communicating just by watching what they're looking at.
Right.
So I think that bit is easy to understand, that not all communication is verbal. I think what is perhaps more challenging to people is the concept that plants would be communicating at all or would have anything to communicate about. So I guess maybe it would be good to get a sense from where you got this idea. How did this concept become a part of your normality?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that we are all born with this ability, right? So I've taught children. I've taught, I think now I forget his age. I think he was 80, might have been 90, year old man, year young man, a few years ago. So I've ranged a wide range of people. And by far, children are the easiest to teach to communicate. I don't even have to teach them. All I have to do is ask them to sit with a dandelion for 5 minutes. And when I ask them what they're experiencing, they give me clues that is exactly what dandelions healing gifts are for. So, um, so I would say we're all born with this innate ability because we are meant, we are part of nature. So we are meant to be in community with all of our more than human kin. However, our culture doesn't recognize it, and that's been kind of stifled for most of the people alive today. I don't know if that's true, but the most in our cultures, that's true. So for me, as a young child, my grandfather was a Methodist minister, but his true love was gardening. And he would always teach me to speak to the plants. So we always sang to strawberries, particularly when we were harvesting. He always had classical music playing in his greenhouse. We would ask permission. And he never told me, that he receives information from them, but we were supposed to give our thanks, our gratitude, and sing to them. That was what was required of us. And I don't know exactly where, but somewhere along the lines, maybe it was something I've always known, was that some people are able to communicate with plants. And I had always hoped that that would be me. Like, and I felt that I had to be good enough, right? I had to have maybe enough training, or if I was of pure enough heart, I would be able to do this. And I tried, then my herbal studies started when I was in, well, elementary school actually, but flower essences, then homeopathy all in middle school. And as I got deeper and deeper into the herbal world, I heard more and more people who were able to communicate with plants. And I had a teacher who tried to teach me, and it was really challenging. And still to this day, I don't understand their instructions. Um, and meanwhile, while I'm having that experience, I'm now in my mid 20s. I have two young children at home. We just took in my then 18-year-old nephew, who's 6'3", and the five of us with my then husband were living in a small house. It was 670 square foot house. And there were lots and lots of issues, lots of drama going on. And the only time of day that I had to myself was in the mornings. So I would go out in the mornings. We lived on a farm. I'd go out and I would harvest berries. And I would wake up just so stressed, like all of these issues. What are we going to do with this? And as I picked the berries, I would start to find solutions. And I'd come back feeling really good. So this went on, I'm not sure how long, for quite a while before I realized that those solutions were coming to me from mulberry, who was the main tree that I was working with at that time. And once I had that realization, like, oh, this is what communicating means. Like this is how it is. It's actually really quite simple. Then it became something of a passion project for me of trying to get more and more people to have those experiences.
There's quite a lot in what you've said. And I guess, somebody who's of a more skeptical nature
Mm.
might say, well, surely, it's not the plant telling you what to do. It's the fact that you are more relaxed and therefore your, ideas are coming to you.
Mhm.
So what is it that makes you certain that it was the mulberry plant that was speaking to you?
So that's a really good question. And I don't know that I can say exactly. But for me, it's just about a number of times, right? So first of all, the information that I receive, it's usually in a different format than my thinking brain or my own voice. So I compare it to like, you're doing something and you hear your mother's voice in your head. Like, it's the same language, it's the same tone, but it's not how you would speak to yourself. So it's that way. And each plant has, for me anyways, they have, not that I could say, oh, this is mulberry's voice or this is dandelion's voice, but they tend to speak in a different format. They also, give me information that I wouldn't have come up with on my own, and sometimes, quite honestly, because this was going, I don't know, close to 20 years ago that I was having that experience. So I've been working with them rather intensively for close to 20 years, and so quite honestly, I often will argue back with, not often, but there have been times that I do argue back with them, and they always tend to be right, even though it's like completely against what I want them to be saying. Um, so that's, to me, it's just a matter of, um, I guess we could say trial and error, but just a matter of experience, right? It's a different syntax, different tone, sometimes different language. Sometimes I receive it in images. I don't always hear it like internal language. I'll receive images, or sometimes I'll receive sensations, and sometimes, of course, it's just like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that. But other times it's not. And then what's really lovely is when we have groups of people together. And so when we have groups of people together, all working with one particular plant, we'll start to see a similar theme going throughout. Now, of course, there's different, I always say different flavors on it because what you're needing at the time is different than what I'm needing at the time. And the plant will resonate with us differently. And so we can each receive information that's quite different. But often there's still an underlying current going along. Um, and, I'm okay with people being skeptical about it. Like, I've, of course, experienced that in my life, my own family included. Um, and I just always say, well, what if, So, like, what if the plants, what if you were able to receive information with the plants? And just, try to engage with the childlike innocence and see what happens.
And indeed, the you are not alone. And if you think about the Bach flower remedies,
Right,
you know, it was through, some would say, intuition, but it's the direct communication from the plant. What is the plant telling me uh,
right.
that it wants to offer? So I think this is something that we've lost, but which is there and has not left us completely. So I guess maybe the question is, how do plants communicate?
Mhm.
Um, do they communicate with each other, first of all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I just want to go back a little bit because you asked a question earlier that I didn't even answer about like why would plants want to communicate with us? And so I think that's tied in with this. And so first of all, when you talk about the Bach remedies, like we can go way, way back, right? Like we all have ancient ancestors who at one point in time, this was really normal and natural for them. Fortunately, there are people alive today that they're like living ancestors. It's normal and natural for them. So we can always lean on them. But we know that this is why humanity has continued because this is how we learned what plants we were able to eat and what plants we weren't able to eat. There's serious guidance and as well as the medicine of them all, and that's where Bach comes in as well. But long before him, humans were learning about medicinal plants directly from the plants. And just to point out, we continue to. Um, so, so there's my belief, and you can take it or leave it, is that of course plants are intelligent. There's a huge vein of science right now that is all about plant intelligence, and they do all kinds of wonderful experiments. And every time I read the books, I think I'm going to get so inspired, and instead I get so angry because I'm like, well, this is what our indigenous elders have always said. So it's just Western science catching up with indigenous science. Um, but still, um, through those plant intelligence experiments, we learned that yes, absolutely, plants communicate with one another. And there's all one, I mean, we can do scientific studies, but we can also just observe nature. So, like, one of my favorite stories is the tobacco plants. And there's a particular tobacco, and I can't remember which variety it is, but they are pollinated by moths. And of course, moths, the precursor to them is a caterpillar, right? So they want the moths to come there, but if the caterpillars are starting to eat their leaves too much, so back up a little bit. So a moth comes out at night. So the flower has to be blooming at night for the moths to pollinate. But if their caterpillars are eating the leaves too much, they switch their bloom from nighttime to daytime to attract birds to come and eat the caterpillars. So our plants are so intelligent, and they always work with other nature. And I say that they are our ambassadors because there are other aspects of nature that we can communicate with all aspects of nature. I find plants to be the easiest introduction, and partly it's because they recognize their role, so they remember who they are. They remember their sacred contract to be part of all of nature, all of Earth, and part of that contract is to help humanity to evolve and to guide us because they really tend to look at us as the little siblings who, we're like the toddlers that keep falling down or bumping into the same wall. And so they're here to really help us to learn to evolve and to grow.
It's interesting because I'm got trying to figure which question to ask first because there's
Yeah.
just so much in what you've said. Um, we know that they communicate chemically as well with each other, and we know that they also rely on microrhizomes and bacteria in the soil
Mhm.
um, to help them to communicate with each other too. So that there is a chemical communication.
Mhm.
And what you just said there is a very practical, the story about the tobacco plant switching from flowering at night to flowering in the day. I think that that's very telling because that's a survival mechanism, and you would expect plants to be communicating about very pragmatic survival matters. Um,
Right.
do they with each other have deeper conversations? Now, this sounds like an odd question, but we know that, okay, let's put this question a different way. We know that different animals are more self aware and remember more of who they are, more connected with their higher selves than others. Same as human beings. And we have had animal communicators on the channel before who have talked about um, how animals who are more self aware or more aware of who they are as spirit beings, what they see in the world and what they feel, etc.
Mhm.
So, is there maybe the question I'm wanting to ask is are all plants aware of their higher self,
Mhm.
or are some more aware than others?
Mhm. So, to be honest, this is beyond my field, but my assumption from working with plants is that they are all aware. Um, And, however, there are some plants, like right now, I'm looking out of this gorgeous sweet gum tree. And so, I feel that trees and bushes, even some perennials that have long lives, they they have a deeper intelligence, and partly it's because they have memories stored in them. So they're able to like convey much more information than a plant that's come and gone in a season. Now, having said that, though, let me tell you, like those dandelion weeds, they are powerhouses of information. So, so I feel, um, so I would say, I think that they all are aware because there's just no reason for them to not be aware. Um,
Well,
and
though, that's an interesting distinction that you're making between perennial plants that are long lived and
Mhm.
annual plants that are only here for a season. I think that that's a very interesting distinction. But then again, you're saying that your feeling is that even the annuals are going to have a high degree of awareness.
Mhm.
And maybe, maybe there's something stored in terms of genetic information
Oh, for
that
sure.
ensures that that's passed on.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing, what I guess I should say more about the trees and the bushes, it's that they develop a personality. So I'm sure we've all had like, a particular tree that we really have a heart's connection to, or there's something about that tree. So like for me, one of my great beloveds is an ash tree that lives in Vermont. Now I can connect with any ash and I can still receive the same core information, but that particular one has a different personality. Or, there are trees like the oh, bristlecone pines. That they're like real scrubby ones, but they're so ancient, and so they've been in all the elements and weathered that they have very particular personalities. And so that's something that we don't tend to get in the annuals. So we tend to get more of a like even keel message from each dandelion. again, they're going to respond to us depending on what's going on in our life at that point in time. So I can communicate with the same dandelion, not obviously not the same dandelion plant, but I can continue to communicate with dandelion, and I have for over 20 years, and I'm still constantly floored by the information I get from them. Um, but it's not like, there's certain humans that they're just full of personality, right? And that's like, that's how a lot of trees and bushes are, because they've had the time to develop that. Um, yeah.
Hmm. So, how do plants see us?
Mm. Well, like I said, they see us as the little siblings, it's just really like, oh, that humanity. So this again goes back to your question of like, why would plants want to communicate with humans? And I think that's a question I often hear in different formats. And one of the reasons is because we've been so awful to plants, right? Like even if we try not to be, we have been, humanity as a whole. We've deforested much of the earth. We like are using herbicides everywhere. We're doing genetic modifications. We can just go on and on and on. And so it's like when people first start to realize that they could communicate with plants, they're like, oh, I don't want to know what they have to hear, what they have to say, right? Or like I have some friends who are vegetarian. They're like, no, don't tell me that they're intelligent because then I have nothing I can eat. um, but the plants aren't that way. In my experience, they are incredibly forgiving. And so, like, I still mess up. I still, do things to cause harm to them, or I don't listen to their advice, which ends up causing harm. And they're just always like, okay, like, make amends, we hear you, and let's do this again. Um, yeah. So go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I think that that's very telling. What do they talk about?
Oh,
Are
anything and everything. So very rare. Like I generally recommend when we go to work with a plant that we sit with them. We want to be in our heart, right? Like getting into our heart space is crucial, because when we're in our heart space, that's when we are able to receive more freely. um, we're more open, we're more receptive. And it's also the basis of good communication with humans. Like, we've all had those conversations with a person where it's like no matter what we're saying to one another, we're not getting each other, right? And it's because we're not in our heart. So if we get into our heart space, it allows that information to flow. And so it's always nice to just see what they have to offer, but also it's good if we have questions. So if there's stuff going on in our life, or maybe it is just like, what guidance would you like, or what message would you like for humanity? So I mean, it really ranges. Like in my own life, they've shown me future partners. They've shown me the land where I live now. They've helped me with really challenging conflicts. They've helped me learn new healing techniques. Like so I have an apprenticeship program, and this past summer we added a new theme to it where we call it remembering and unforgetting. And it's really about helping to overcome the a lot of like the white supremacy, the racism, the sexism, all of patriarchy, all of this stuff. And so all of my apprentices worked with a different plant on a different aspect, and the information that they came forward, it's just incredible. Um, so they're able to show us like how we can live in harmony with all of nature if we're willing to listen.
it is a very interesting fact that many of the herbalists to whom I have spoken talk about plants showing up when they are needed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, if they're working with a particular client that that needs a remedy that they haven't had in the past, suddenly, they look out and there in the garden is the very plant that they need, that has seeded itself, that has just come up. It's a very interesting thing that people observe, that plants do seem to want to be helpful. But I guess maybe the question that many people will be asking is, but is this anthropomorphizing?
Mm. Yeah, I hear that a lot. And the the thing is that like I'm a human. So part of our goal in this, and which is why we want to start in our heart, is to try to overcome as many filters as we can. So it also means like trying to do as much healing work as we can so that like we can just be as clean and clear as possible. However, I am a human. I will always have a human filter. I think maybe I shouldn't use the word always, but most likely I will have that human filter. So, yes, I'm sure there is some aspect of it, but but I don't feel that it's that's the overall theme or overall experience. Um, for sure, uh, people have tried to anthropomorphize all of nature. Um, and so, the whole goal for me is to just be as clean as a receptacle for the plant so that I can receive their information without any expectations or, yeah, just free for them. Um, so I would say I would say it's like 99% anthropomorphized free. I don't know what that word would be, but yes, we're always going to have a human lens.
I think the notion of anthropomorphizing, and I was having this very conversation about animals on my other channel, Pet Talk, only a few days ago,
Mm-hmm.
with a wonderful woman who is studying grief in animals.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of anthropomorphizing, it is the stick with which we are always beaten whenever we want to advocate
Mm-hmm.
um, for sentience in
Right.
beings.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an important point to address because it's easy to put ourselves in the paws of an animal, if I can put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because particularly if they are mammals, because we have certain things in common, including the nervous system, and our brains are wired very similarly. So it's not difficult to imagine that they're going to be feeling things
Mm-hmm.
in a similar way to us, albeit from a dog perspective or a horse perspective, whatever it might be. So we can see that, but a plant is actually physically very different to us. So it's difficult to imagine then things like how they might experience pain
Mm-hmm.
or whether they would experience love.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can really see that they would experience fear, absolutely, because they're forever being chomped on by little bugs and things. Um, but then that would imply that there is fear as well. So I guess maybe what I'm asking you is, do you have a sense of what their emotional um, landscape or what the emotional range would be when
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about plants?
Yeah, so um, I think we can't talk about them as far as like emotional landscape or emotional range. I think it's so very different, and that's why I say like um, it's not so much about anthropomorphization. Again, I'm not sure if that's the word, because we can try to impose our feelings. So you mentioned grief. So that's to me, like that's one of the biggest issues when it comes to plants is so often I have people contacting me that like their favorite tree, the wire trimmers came through and they like chopped off a huge part of the tree, or a neighbor like cut down the tree, or something, and they just feel such shame and such guilt around this, and they like, I mean, sometimes it's years that they're carrying this with them, and they feel so heartbroken that this happened. And for sure, trees appreciate if we ask permission. All plants appreciate if we ask permission before harvesting. And also, that means being willing to hear them say no and then like find another way. But they like it happens, right? And so what I always encourage those people is to then go spend time with, if it's a tree, there's usually still part of the trunk left, so go spend part time with whatever aspect of that tree is. And in my own inquiries, they don't see, plants just don't see death the same way that we do. Like to them it really is just this continuation of life in a different form. So when we're so heartbroken that this happened to them, they're just like, well, I'm still alive. You know, like I don't know what you're talking about. My form is different, but I'm still alive. And um, I think I write about this in my book that I had this really powerful experience with an eastern hemlock tree, which in my area there's an insect that's causing, eastern hemlocks are like one of the oldest trees in this area, and there's a little insect that's causing mass deaths around. And so I was in an old growth forest, and there was this gorgeous tree, and I'm like looking at this hemlock and I'm just like totally in love. And then all of a sudden I look up and I see, oh, you're dead. And the tree's response to me immediately was like, I'm not dead. Like, look. And I can see woodpecker holes. They're like, and baby birds in there. It's like, look, there's birds living in me. There's ants crawling up in me. There's mushroom on me. Like, I'm alive in all of these things. And so yeah, I don't think that we can talk about plants as far as like having their emotional landscape, or that is like again trying to fit them into our human mold, and a very narrow human mold. And trees have such a much wider experience than we can imagine.
That's brilliant. That's exactly what we need to understand is that when we're talking about them communicating with us, it doesn't mean that we are seeing them being thinking and feeling about the same things that we are.
Right.
I think too that when we're talking about trees that can be hundreds of years old,
Hmm.
there is something there that's it's bound to be different. They've been on this planet for centuries.
Hmm.
Um, so have you had conversations with great tree elders?
Oh, for sure. Like, so I mentioned the Eastern hemlock, but also I've had the great fortune of spending time in the redwoods, and there's just something about them. And so yes, absolutely. I've had, as I try as much as I can to connect with tree elders and spend time with them.
So what is your best advice for those who would love to develop the ability to communicate with plants?
Yeah, so again, we want to like start with our hearts. So first of all, I guess my best advice is just you can. Like, just keep that as a possibility. Everyone has this ability in there, and often, so I wrote the book, I teach classes, I teach apprenticeships, and what I always say in my classes is my whole role there is to help uncover that culturalization. So you have that ability. It's innate in you. It's just as innate as breathing. It's just a matter of getting rid of the conditioning that tells you that you aren't able to. Um, and then the next step is, again, learning how to access your heart space and determine when it is that you're in your heart and when you're not. And it's much easier to tell, okay, yes, I'm in my heart space. And my key for that, I mean, there's many, many ways that we can access there, but I find the easiest one is to be gratitude, and to just simply think of the things that you're grateful for, or even read a list of things that you're grateful for. And then you're going to feel a physiological shift. And so when you feel that shift in your body, you want to start to notice it. Like for me, my breathing slows, my shoulders drop, my hands feel big, my feet feel big. Um, Often I'll even feel like my chest is opening. And sometimes that can be painful. But you notice whatever the sensations are for you, and that's what lets you know, okay, I'm in my heart space. And then, like you said about the herbalist, it's ask for a plant. So ask for a plant to show themselves, and then pay attention to who it is, like who starts popping up around you. Um, and sometimes you might find that there are multiples, and so pick one, and just sit with them and see what comes.
It's that stillness, isn't it? It's coming to that point of stillness and peace, which is, the heart space again. So that's very beautiful. Thank you very much, Jen, for your time today and for helping us to understand that plants are very much alive in every sense of the word. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Anna. Thank you.
The book that we have been discussing is Communicating with Plants, and it is an absolute joy. You happen to have on the picture my absolute favorite thing in the whole wide world, a bluebell wood. Very, talk about things speaking to me. That really does speak to me. Magical, magical places. So, I'll be putting a link to this in the description box. And if people want to find you, Jen, how do they do that?
So the easiest way is to go to my website, which is bridgetsway.com. And yeah, I'm sure you'll have a link, so I don't have to spell it out for you, but that's the easiest way.
I'll be putting the link in the description box for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we are going to be looking at Italian American folk healing. But
Mm.
until then, I wish you a lovely week. And I also invite you to follow me on Substack, as I do write about plants there, as well as my adventures with my dog Teddy, and of course, astrological um, astrological inspiration that comes to mind. So do follow me there. And until next time, goodbye.